Yes, the Resident Evil game. Ultimate Challenge. Lifeshouts.com. Are you ready? Which game takes place in the Spencer Mansion? Resident Evil. Code Veronica. Resident Evil 1996. Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 1996. Where does Leon S. Kennedy first encounter Las Plagas? Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil, The Dark Side Chronicles. Resident Evil 4. Which game is set in the Baker family estate? Resident Evil, Revelations, Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, Resident Evil 0. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard. In which game does Jill Valentine face Nemesis? Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil Outbreak. Resident Evil 3. Which Resident Evil game introduced Mr. X as a relentless pursuer? Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 2. Where does Ethan Winters encounter Lady Dimitrescu? Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil Village. Which game features the USS Delta team attempting to contain the outbreak in Raccoon City? Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, Resident Evil Outbreak, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. In which game do Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomer travel to Africa? Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6. Resident Evil 5. Which game introduced the concept of co-op gameplay as a central feature? Resident Evil Revelations, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil Outbreak. Resident Evil 5. Where do players first explore the Queen Zenobia cruise ship? Resident Evil Revelations 2, Resident Evil Revelations, Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil Revelations. Which game is set on Rockfort Island and Antarctica? Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil Survivor, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Resident Evil Code Veronica. Which Resident Evil title is known for the tagline "No Hope Left"? Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Revelations. Resident Evil 6. In which game do players use Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohn as dual protagonists? Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Survivor. Resident Evil 0. Which game marked the series' transition to a first-person perspective? Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 7, Biohazard. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard. Which Resident Evil game was remade in 2019 with updated graphics and mechanics? Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake, Resident Evil for Remake, Resident Evil to Remake. Resident Evil to Remake. Make sure to like and subscribe.